I've been thinking about the way in which, well, lots of people tend to think the same way. They tend to think much along the same lines as everybody else thinks. And I've called this phenomenon social thinking. Social thinking seems to be the norm. It's the way in which people tend to think, society tends to think. It's the way we all tend to think much the same kind of things. And you can see it in a whole range of social issues, whether it might be feminism, whether it might be on climate change, whether it might be on lockdown, whether it might be on Black Lives Matter or racial issues. There's a kind of a common consensus about what's right and what's wrong, a common consensus upon what you should be thinking and also what you should not be thinking. It's a social thinking, it's a herd-like approach to things, and it's one which I think characterises a more modern society, the kind of society we have today, one which is deeply interconnected, networking with social media. It just produces this social thinking that everyone tends to think much the same. In contrast to that, though, there's something else which is really independent thinking. You can either be a social thinker or you can be an independent thinker, and you can't be both, essentially. Independent thinking, of course, is, well, it's thinking for yourself. It's working things out in your own way. It's trying to come to an understanding of things using reason and logic and maybe argument and evidence and trying to grapple with the issues themselves and working that out. It's not following a view simply because that's what the majority think, or because there's a critical mass of thinking which the herd have maintained or achieved. Rather, it's someone who, instead of ploughing the main furrow that everyone ploughs and follows all the way, they'll go their own way because they've worked things out for themselves and thought about it. And they're not following the herd. They are independent thinkers. And I wanted to commend to you the idea that this is the kind of route that maybe the people who are making the best contribution to society are not the herd thinkers or the social thinkers. The people who make the most valuable contributions to society are those who are the independent thinkers. And learning to think independently is not an easy task. It's quite difficult. I'll tell you why. Firstly, because there are consequences if you are an independent thinker. Consequences are that often you will be outside the mainstream. You'll not be thinking like the vast majority of people. People who think in the mainstream probably take a lot of their views from social big media issues, BBC, The Guardian, newspapers like that, Facebook, all those kind of things, kind of corral people's thoughts and push them that way. But an independent thinker will be on their own route, and they'll be therefore at odds with society, odds with the majority of people, and they will therefore, you'll find that you're viewed sometimes with suspicion, maybe even sometimes with dislike, possibly even with hatred for taking quite a distinctly unsocial thinking approach to things. That will cause you some difficulties, or it may well cause you some difficulties, because it's been seen that some people are just treated rather badly from that. You could lose your platform for speaking. You might lose an opportunity to give a talk to somebody, or to be welcomed by some friends. You might even lose your YouTube channel, or you might lose your job even in extreme cases. All of these things have happened, and happened many times. Consequences of independent thinking are not slight or light. They're quite difficult. But the last thing I wanted to leave you with was this one last thought, and that is that although I would say that independent thinking is a dangerous subject, a dangerous thing to do these days, it's also, I would say, dangerous not to do it. There are consequences for not thinking independently, and they're even greater, I would say, than the consequences of thinking for yourself and being ostracized by others. If you don't think independently, then really you're not living up to your full potential. as a human being, someone who's been given these amazing gifts of reason, rationality, understanding, the ability to think for yourself, to not use those, to throw those away and to put them all to one side, is to deny the very core essence of what it means to be a human being, to be a rational being, to be someone who has a voice. It means to lose that voice in amongst the herd, in amongst the crowd, to not have a voice of your own, to not have a standing of your own, to not think for yourself, to not be your own person. I think that kind of consequence is even greater than any consequence of not fitting in. I think becoming your own person, gaining your own voice, it only comes from thinking for yourself, through being an independent thinker, and not simply following the herd. I try to get my students to do that whenever they're involved in research methods as the subject I teach. But it's so hard to think independently that many would rather not do it, and they take an easier path. The easier downward path is to think socially, to think like the herd. But it's only the people who think for themselves who not only make real progress in society and can change society for the better, but they also can change themselves for the better too.